understanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Late Late Show. It's good to be back here for another month, and yeah, we've got another guest today, and today we've got Paul Caplan on the show with me, who's my colleague. Hi, Paul.
Good evening, Seema. Good evening, everybody.
Cool. So I got Paul onto the show today because we're going to be talking about a topic which I think is particularly relevant to him. But before we get into all of that, how are you doing, Paul? You good?
No, not bad, not bad. Looking forward to it. It's going to be good.
Yeah, me too. So how was your weekend? Like, what did you get up to? What is like the world of Paul like?
Weekend is my go for a cycle ride time. Backwards and forwards across the rivers in London. That's my idea of a weekend.
Nice. Yeah, I know you're a big fan of like the Tour de France and yeah, all of that.
It's the only sport worth bothering with, Seema.
And that's yeah, I see what you're doing there. No, absolutely isn't. But yeah, cool. I like cycling as well, actually. I do a lot more of it than I did before, although I need to get back into cycling outdoors. I do it in a gym now, which is just not the same. But yeah, I used to have my bike and I used to love going for like a ride along the canal.
Yeah.
By the river. That was really, really nice, actually. But
see,
yeah.
I'm a good influence on you. I'm converting you to the best things in life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually now, since I've moved out of London, I definitely need to get a bike because yeah, it will just help me get around everywhere a lot quicker. So
Absolutely. There's no transport in the suburbs. You need to move back into the city, girl.
Yeah, I think I probably need to consider that at some point. So so today what we're going to be talking about is whether university degrees can be industry focused. We said without becoming job factories, just to be controversial, right? But I thought that this was a really good question to discuss with Paul because Paul is actually the leader of our MA in advertising, and the MA is very, very industry focused, and we've worked on that together as well. And I love teaching on Paul's MA. And I think that the students are actually, you know, they really see the benefits of that focus. And a lot of them have gone on to get some great jobs in the industry. But I think it's really important that we kind of critique the whole approach and, you know, understand where the balance is. And yeah, I think it's always good to kind of critique and discuss these things because we do things, but we don't always talk about why we're doing what we're doing and whether it's working or not and where the lines are. So yeah, I think this will be a really, really good discussion today. But before we get into that, Paul, do you want to tell us a bit about you and, you know, what you've been doing and what you do? Yeah.
As Seema says, I run the MA in advertising at London College of Communication, which is part of the University of the Arts, London. In previous incarnations, I've been a press photographer, sports photographer, editor of business magazines, and then I worked for the government's communications agency, advising them in the early days of social media, etc. And then when the Tories last came in 2010, and all my work dried up, I did a PhD, which then led me into teaching. And I've taught undergraduates and postgraduates, and in previous times I've taught in FE, and I've even spent a bit of time teaching in schools. So I suppose I know a little bit about this. But right now, as Seema says, my job is running the MA, and my job with that is, I like to think my job is to get them jobs. And I suppose what I like to think is unique about our degree, or is the USP of our degree, is that we work closely with industry. So I have various industry partners who work with me and Seema and the rest of the team on different units. And it's not just that they come in and do guest lectures or even just set briefs. They work very closely with us on deciding what it is we should be teaching and what is relevant for our guys to learn and what is going to get them jobs. So I see the relationship between industry and my degree as, it's a horrible way of thinking about it, but further upstream in terms of planning and developing and delivering the course, not just waiting for us to turn job ready people out into the industry. And I think that's much more interesting, because that's a model that I think we need to do if we're going to actually provide industry with what they need.
And do you see that as the job of our courses? Do you think it is to provide industry with what they need?
I think it's the job of some courses. I don't think all higher education needs to do that. I think higher education has a role in providing industry, and I mean that in the wider sense, with the sort of talent that it needs. And perhaps we'll come on to what I think that talent is and what industry is now asking us for. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be the opportunity for people to study different things, study wider things, which actually are part of what makes a good society, what makes a good generation of young people. And they don't have to be directly related to industry. In fact, I think that the subjects that need to be studied, that need to be developed in higher education and further into further education, even into schools, are the sort of wider skills that industry is now asking for. I think the old idea, take our degree in advertising, the old idea that we turn out people who can just make ads isn't relevant anymore. Not only because AI can do an awful lot of that stuff, but also, why would you be paying 20, 30, 50,000 pounds to learn to do stuff that you can learn from YouTube? What you get in higher education is the opportunity to develop critical skills, imaginative skills, speculative skills, critical skills. And those are the things that I think industry really needs. They don't need another Photoshop jockey or another person who can put a nice Canva together. Even before we had AI that could do that, it was possible to do that without having done a degree. The time they spend with us doing the degree, what's valuable is not the certificate they get at the end, but the ways of working, the ways of thinking that our industry partners are asking us to develop in the talent that they pull into their pipelines.
Yeah, I think you've made loads of really interesting points there. And so firstly, I completely agree that it doesn't apply to all courses. There's not one sort of set rule. And I think, you know, on an advertising degree, it's very different to if you're doing, something that's perhaps more theoretical, less practical. And therefore, firstly, it's got to be looked at a course level, right? And then even within that, what's so interesting is that you said we're not just teaching, you know, skills that perhaps AI can do for us now, but we're talking about things like critical thinking. And you know what was really interesting, Paul, is before, when I thought of this topic, I did a quick Google just to see, like, what's the word out there? What are people saying about this? And what was really interesting are some of the questions that it threw up. And it said things like, can practical training and critical thinking coexist in a degree? And I thought to myself, but the practical training that we are perhaps trying to offer students is about things like critical thinking, whereas they were being treated as like two separate things, like it's one or the other. And there were a lot of things that I saw which were to that effect, like, you know, can degrees keep up with the industry without sacrificing depth? And I remember thinking, but I don't think that we're sacrificing depth here. I feel like we're actually building that, you know? And so I think it begs the question of, what does industry focused mean? And so what would you say industry focused means in your context?
I think that's actually for industry to tell us what they need. I remember a few years ago having a conversation with one of our industry partners and asking him what what he wanted to see in our graduates. And he was talking at the time about things like soft skills, which is often thrown around by supposedly vocational courses, talking about how we develop soft skills in our graduates so that they can work in teams and they can present things and they're articulate and they're confident, etc. All of that is great. But I've noticed recently that actually industry is asking for more from our graduates, and I think all of the recent stuff about the jobs crisis for graduates, whether those are undergraduates graduating or postgraduates graduating, and this idea that those entry-level jobs have gone, to a certain extent they have. And I had an interesting conversation with one of the students the other day, who quite rightly is frightened about these stories and what that means for her chance of getting a foot on the ladder. And I was trying to tell her that actually industry is saying to us now that they want the sorts of skills in our graduates that they can't get from AI and they can't get from other places. So yeah, critical thinking is one thing. Imagination is another. Creativity in all of its different forms is another. And I think that's, as you say, this simple opposition between practical and theoretical. I don't think that stands up. I don't think that you can have a creative practice without some of the key business skills that they're asking us to teach around imagination, around the sort of design thinking, around different ways of approaching business problems. And I think that sort of education is both practical and theoretical. And I think that simple opposition, which I know universities have a problem with in their marketing, I think, because they sort of say, oh, we're a very practical course, or, oh, we're a very critical course. And I don't think that opposition really helps the students. I don't think it helps us who are trying to do the teaching. And I don't think it helps with industry, who just want intelligent and articulate and creative and imaginative and critical people to enter the workplace. And so I think, going back to that idea of industry focused, let's let industry in its widest sense come to us and tell us what sort of people they want to start employing, and we're the experts in how to get young people, or older people for that matter, those sorts of sets of skills. And that sort of thing, like interdisciplinarity is one of the key things that we can start to do. Now, a lot of these things demand that we have a completely different model for education, and that goes right down into schools, right up into universities. We need to rethink how the curriculum works, how it works with industry, and not be frightened of the idea that, yes, we are industry focused because we're part of a society that depends on having an industry that can do the job that it needs to do.
Yeah, I think, again, really, really interesting points that you make there, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. So just another point to add, which is that this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, who are publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So if you want to level up your own professional development, then do make sure that you visit hachetlearning.com to explore their full range of titles. Also, AQA know that teachers are the real experts in the classroom, and that's why they work closely with teachers like yourself, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training, and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are that you already know their work. And as we head into a new school year, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. So if you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, just head to their website or search AQA, We Work with Experts. So Paul, I really want to touch on some of these great points that you made about the different skills that employers are actually looking for. And I completely agree with you that, and with them, that it's about more than just the soft skills, right? If it was just about the soft skills, you know, why not just send someone off to do a course in good communication, right? But
Yeah.
it's definitely about more than that. And I think some of these terms that you mentioned, like design thinking, imagination, creativity, these are the core kind of things that we can bring as a, you know, as a media school that is much more specialist and is going to really help them to practice those skills, because it's not just about teaching it, right? Like everyone can find those skills, but I think what we really provide is a training ground for them to practice those skills and get it wrong and try it again and try it from a different angle and with feedback, right? I remember when I was in sport, you know, my coach always said this thing about feedback and how that is the critical part, you know, that can be contributed, right? If you're developing a skill but you're doing it wrong, there's no point unless you are kind of doing it under the watch of someone who can provide you feedback that you can then work with and then get better at the thing. And so I think if we're trying to help students be better with these types of, you know, skills like design thinking, critical thinking, imagination, and then we provide them with lots of different kind of briefs to practice that with, then that's definitely something, you know, very valuable. I guess my question would be, if you were to be confronted by a more traditional academic and they were to say, okay, but what you're teaching at university needs to be grounded in something much more academic. It needs to have that academic, you know, integrity and rigor and depth. Are you able to find those sources that bring these concepts to life in the way that we want to teach them to students?
Yeah,
And
I think
is it
so.
important
Yeah,
to do that? How do you find that balance?
I don't see it as a balance because I don't see it as an opposition. I think the idea that all of the traditional, what you might call traditional academic skills, you know, critical reading, research, rigor, all of those things that, you know, academics are trained in. You know, I did all of that when I did my PhD. But what was interesting about the only thing that was interesting about my PhD was that it was a practice research PhD. So what I was doing was using practice, creative practice as part of the research. It was the research method I used. I didn't do surveys. What I did was I made stuff in order to learn stuff. So it is that opposition, the idea that there is this world of theory and this world of academia that is different from the world of, and I won't call it creativity, the world of industry and the world of training in its wider sense, I don't think stands up. I think we've got a really interesting model for the MA students' final project. Normally, with an MA, you do your MA thesis at the end, and that's what you get your degree on the basis of. What we've ended up doing is getting them to do a practice research project with around an industry topic, around a future-facing industry topic, again set by one of our industry partners. But what I say to the students right at the beginning is, you're not writing it for me. You're not writing it for Seema. You're not writing it for us as your teachers. You're writing it for the person that you want to get a job with. We make them pick somebody at the start of the process, a real human, you know, the creative director of agency X or the strategy director of agency Y or the marketing director of that brand or what have you. And we say, you are making your project for them. You will write it, you will design it, you will produce it for them, right? But we say, what does that reader going to want to see? They're going to want to see all the creative, speculative, imaginative stuff that you are going to make as part of your practice research. But they're also going to want to see that you can do proper research, that you can do rigorous research, that you can write research up properly. They're going to want to see a literature review because they're going to want to know that you know what has already been found out about the topic that you have chosen. So if you look at the projects that the guys have produced over the years, many of which have been used to get them jobs, you'll see amazing speculative thinking and creative thinking and design thinking and critical thinking and imagination in play. But you'll also see real good old-fashioned rigor, in the academic parts of the literature review and the methodology, etc., and is bringing those together, means that the student that they then employ have got the broad range of skills that they can then use as part of their business. What they don't need is us to do that training for them. What they need is for us to provide and train people in those sets of skills that the industry now needs. And just going back to one other thing you said, Seema, about this feedback thing, I think feedback is one of the huge things we can do. But I think part of the problem in the way that education, and I think this goes way beyond universities, think of that is in terms of marks. And it's shocking every year when I say to the students, don't worry about the marks you're getting. That is not going to get you a job. What's going to get you a job is the portfolio and the projects that you create and the story you tell in interviews. But they're obsessed with what mark they get. I wonder whether I do audio feedback for the students. I wonder to what extent they're listening to the audio feedback, or they're looking at the mark that we have to give them. And because the universities are built around this model of having to give marks in order to give classes of degrees, etc., so much emphasis is put on that. And even if you're a slightly odd teacher like me and try to get the students to think in other terms, the students are already thinking that. And they've thought like that because school has trained them to think in terms of grades, GCSEs, A levels, etc., undergraduates, then postgraduates. So the feedback, which you're quite right, Seema, is vital in this development of intelligent, creative, and critical workforce, all right, is being stymied by this need to have marks associated with it. There's a great bit in one of my favorite books, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where the character is teaching in a university and he chooses not to give the students marks until the end of the year. He has to mark them because the university said, but he doesn't give them to the students. And he notices how the students start to work much better when they're not always checking marks. Now, that's not going to happen because of the systems we're in, but we're fighting against that sort of instrumentalism in order to develop much more creative ways of teaching.
So firstly, I have to point out that I just knew that would be a book that someone like you is reading with that kind of title. But yeah, I really can't agree with you more on, and I think this is the frustration of many teachers, right? That their students are just kind of obsessed with the grade. So often we'll be trying to hammer on about something that's going to help make them better, and they're going, but am I going to get an A? And and it's really hard, like you say, to get away from that because it's such a systemic thing, and they are very focused. I guess we all have this problem with, it shouldn't be a means to an end. There's the process of learning, and that's what's valuable here. And don't worry too much about the mark, because if you get it wrong, it's a great opportunity for you to try it again from another angle and learn something, right? But then on that point of it shouldn't all be a means to an end, are we not doing the same thing when we make a degree really industry focused so that they can get a job? Are we putting too much emphasis then on do this because then you'll get a job, rather than do this because it's something valuable for you to learn?
I have no problem with the idea of a means to an end. If a student is paying my university £20,000, all right, I think they're entitled to know what they're going to get out of that. What I want them to avoid thinking is that it's going to lead to a specific job. All right, I've just been introduced to the new guys who've just started this year, and I always say at the beginning, I ask them, how many of you want to get a job at the end? All stick their hand up. I said, all right, how many of you want to be a creative, which is a sort of job role in advertising? Half of them put their hand up. How many of you want to be a strategist? Half of them put their hand up, or what have you. And I say, all right, part of the thing we need to get away from is the idea that we are going to train you into particular jobs. We're going to get you into a position where you can do the sort of work you want to do. Again, I had a conversation with one of them the other day, who was trying to figure out how to. She's just coming to the end of the course, and she was trying to figure out how she was going to get a job. And I said, rather than thinking of looking for job titles, all right, look for the places that you would like to work, look for the people you would like to work with, and decide the sort of work you want to do. Now, that is means to an end in a much more open and a much more productive way than saying we will train people to be a junior creative, we will train people to be a junior planner, we will train people to be a plumber, we will train people to be an accountant. Let's give people the sorts of skills that they can then go into many different industries, many different roles, work for themselves, start their own business, whatever else it may be. So a means to an end, yes. The end being able to earn enough money to do whatever you want to do with the rest of your life, or means to an end, the end being make the world a better place, or whatever you want to do with your life. So yes, education's a means to an end. I've got no problem with. But I do have a problem if those ends are very narrow and actually channel people into specific things. All right. I want my students to come out with the sorts of skills that means, yes, they can get a job in an advertising agency. Yes, they can get a job in a media company. But yes, they could start their own business. Or yes, they could, go and work in a coffee shop. Whatever it is, I don't care what they do, but they will bring a whole set of skills to that is going to make they're more productive, whether they're working for somebody else or working for themselves.
Yeah, I think what you've just done there is you've hit the kind of sweet spot of how to make a degree industry focused without losing the heart of what that degree's about, right? And everything that you just said there is a kind of answer to the typical criticisms you get of making an industry to a degree to industry focused, right? Which is people saying, well, the industry is changing really fast and whatever you teach them is going to be outdated, or we shouldn't be kind of training people into particular jobs, as you said. I think that actually what you're saying is that we're not trying to train people for the industry by training them into these very specific narrow job roles. Our version of training for them for the industry means training them in skills that are going to help them regardless of whether they go into this industry or another one, right? And and I think that is a really powerful argument. I think that what's quite interesting, when I actually worked in advertising, I remember that we very specifically did not hire people with advertising degrees. That sounds crazy, right? But this was a well-known thing on the floor, right? Which was you hire people with computer science degrees or you hire people with a maths degree because what they're likely to have are, good analytical skills, critical thinking skills. They can think fast and they're very analytical, right? Whereas the problem with hiring people that had advertising degrees was that they would come in with a really set idea of what working in advertising means, and it would be all wrong. And so what they wanted was a blank canvas. Yeah. But I think that what we're talking about here and what you just spoke about is that middle ground, which always needs to be there. And we've always got to find what that middle ground is. And I think it's that really. It's a degree that teaches you in this context, in a media context, all the things that we talked about: critical thinking, design thinking, imagination, creativity, but not putting you into this really narrow field of, I'm going to be a planner or I'm going to be a buyer, because I guess that's where it doesn't work, right? And that's where you can't really prepare for a job anyway. I mean, even, you will know this, you've worked in the industry. It's different in every job. I was a strategist, but what that actually looked like as I went into each of my job roles was completely different. And I was learning on the job all the time. So there was never a point where I was like, yep, I'm really experienced. And so I can go in there and I know exactly what I'm doing. I probably wouldn't be taking a job like that if I was moving in the first place, because then there was nothing in that for me. I wanted to grow. I wanted to be in a new environment where I don't know everything. Otherwise, it's just a comfort move, you know? And so I think on this point of preparation, you know, when we talk about an industry focused degree, really it's saying we're training you with skills that are going to help you navigate your way through the industry, regardless of what that industry is, as opposed to we're going to give you very specific skills that you can only use in one industry, in one area of that industry.
Yes, yes. And I think it's preparing students for the industry of tomorrow, not the industry of today, which is a nice slogan, and I'm just waiting for the university to put that on their masthead. But there's a big class issue here as well, because we work with a big consultancy firm, not an advertising consultancy firm, a big traditional big traditional business consultancy firm. And I was talking to the guy who we work with there about how they recruit, and he said, you know, this global consultancy still recruits from the Ivy League universities and from Oxford and Cambridge. And he says, you know, that's partly it's a class thing, it's partly a tradition thing. He says, but it's also because people who have come with PPE from Cambridge or Oxford or what have you have had a broad-based education. They've been trained to think critically about things because they've done philosophy and politics and economics, etc. The sort of class of people who are able to have that sort of education or have got that sort of backing behind them enables them to be adaptable already. All right. I remember another good friend who was a journalist did some research around the first dot-com boom, and who had been the entrepreneurs who'd set up the first sort of dot-com businesses. And he said he found out that an awful lot of them were from very privileged backgrounds. Basically, they had mummy and daddy behind them, and they had endless confidence because they've been brought up to believe that they could succeed. Just like those Cambridge and Oxford graduates have been trained across their degree to believe that they could succeed. Doesn't matter where you drop me into. You can drop me into that business, that business, that business. You can send me here, you can send me there. I will survive because I've always survived and I have that confidence. We're in a society where we need diversity of talent, but working class people who can't afford to come on my degree, who can't afford to get the sort of opportunity to develop that confidence and those range of skills, are not going to be coming into the industry because they don't have that pipeline in, that way in. And I think part of the problem to be industry focused is that we're trying to provide that sort of confident and articulate and imaginative and creative talent going into the industry, but we're only able to do that for a select few who can afford the sort of training that we're able to give them. And until government and industry start to realize they need to be backing pipelines from diverse communities, not just women, not just from ethnic minorities, etc., but from working class talent that can come into those pipelines, there's going to be just small islands of this in place, and industry is not going to get that talent that it needs, and society isn't going to get that talent that it needs either.
Yeah, I think there's more like brilliant points then. I really like what you raise around class there, because I don't think it's something that's talked about enough. And but it needs to be, right? Because diversity has gone past, as you say, just women and ethnic minorities, right? There's a lot more to that conversation. And I definitely think that is an area that's not really talked about, not just in universities, but even in the industry. I don't think that there's enough of a drive to bring people from different types of backgrounds, from a class perspective, into the mix.
I mean, we're lucky, particularly in advertising, that there are programs that try to bring in, working class kids who've not gone to university, as well as ethnic minority and marginalized communities. So there is a lot of good initiatives going on there. But I think that is just one industry that's trying to bring in some sort of diverse talent. Now, whether they're doing it as part of a DEI initiative that is now going to be hidden because we're scared that Trump is not going to give us any work anymore, or it's actually part of the structure because they know that diverse talent is better for creativity, it's better for teams, it's better for the work we do for clients, etc. But I think there has to be a change in expectations, because the problem is not just that working class kids can't get into these sorts of training initiatives or into these confidence building, creative skill developing environments. The problem is that they don't even think that that is something that is open to them, that is something that is something they could ever imagine themselves doing. And part of the reason for that is that idea again that vocational education is a different thing than higher education or academic education, and it's breaking that distinction, which might enable people to imagine, yeah, I could see myself spending time learning how to be critical, learning how to be creative, learning how to be imaginative, learning design thinking, learning speculation, etc., because those are the skills that make me very, very employable, because business knows that that's what it needs now. If it's going to be working intelligently with AI, it's going to need humans who've got those skills to make the best of AI. But that story is we're working on that story now with the sort of middle class kids and young people that we work with. But that story has to spread throughout society, so working class kids can see that that is a possibility for them, and then they have to be supported by the government and by industry itself to enable them to get that training as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is a really interesting conversation, and we're tackling some really important points here. If you're looking for another great education podcast and you like conversations like this, then do make sure that you check out Chalk and Talk with Anna Stoke. So Anna's a really passionate advocate for evidence-based math education for students of all ages. And on her podcast, she talks about everything from effective teaching methods and how-to guides for teaching math facts to tips for evaluating research shows claims. She brings on really top-notch guests like educators, researchers, and policymakers, and they all talk about issues that directly impact teachers and students. So Chalk and Talk is for anyone that's interested in education, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And as for this podcast and show, it's brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, who are publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools all over the world. So if you want to level up your professional development today, do make sure that you visit hachetlearning.com to explore their full range of titles. So Paul, let's talk a bit about the other kind of benefits of a degree that is industry focused, because on your MA, as you mentioned at the start, you have different agencies and businesses that come and actually partner on the various units, and they deliver live briefs, they come in, they do the briefing, and then they're there to watch the kind of pictures at the end. And I think one of the things that strikes me is that this is a really great opportunity for the students to kind of get some exposure, like real exposure to those industry connections. They get these opportunities to network. I think they've even gone over to the agencies and, been involved in pitching over there, seeing the offices. And I guess they get the chance to kind of build those connections, and then there are real values. There are really valuable outcomes to that. Like, I know that they're connected with one of the people that we have in, and she's constantly posting opportunities in the industry that they can then apply to and, go ahead with. So there's lots of other things that kind of come out as a benefit from the degree being industry focused. So what else would you say is coming out of that for the students that we haven't touched on yet?
I think for me, what is perhaps most valuable is them hearing from industry the problems and the issues that the industry is facing. I mean, I think all industries are doing it. I know the advertising and marketing industries a little better, and what we know is that these industries are, if not in crisis, at least going through periods of rapid change. And what's really good when the students, like you say, go in to visit, a massive agency like Havas, or have a creative agency like BBH coming in to meet them, etc., is they talk to the professionals about not just what their job is or the brief they're setting, but the wider context in which that business is operating. And they're hearing and seeing for themselves the fact that these agencies and these businesses are trying to figure out, frankly, trying to figure out what to do and how to move forward. And they're having to move at pace. And the students are realizing that actually what they thought was a nice, simple industry. Oh, there are creative agencies, I could get a job there. There are media agencies, I could get a job there. There are consultancies, I could get a job there. That doesn't apply anymore. That actually, even if you do manage to get a job in one of those agencies and one of those businesses, all right, what you used to think of as your job title is now shifting and changing as the agency is moving, as it's bringing AI in, or getting rid of certain roles, or winning new clients, or realizing it needs to diversify into this. So I think it's a wake-up call in many ways to them, to see the world in which they're going to try and get a job. And that helps me and you, I think, Seema, when we talk to them about them thinking of their career, thinking of planning their careers, thinking of how to develop their careers. We often talk about taking the principles of design thinking and applying them to their own lives, to their own careers, and thinking of them as choreographing their own career, if you like. And when they've met people in industry who've talked about their businesses, large and small, as places that are in constant flux, they're realizing that actually that is a potential for them, because they can see how if they curate their own skills and their own story and their own position, that they can actually find a way into these businesses. And I think that for me is, alongside having these industry professionals telling me what the ways in which my course developed, those are the two big things that a good relationship with industry can have. And I think it goes so much more than just, oh, we've had a really famous creative director come in and talk to us and show us some adverts, etc. No, I think the students have had a real insight into the nature of the business, not just the nature of the person who's talking to them.
Yeah, it's so true, because I think a lot of students do have this idea, don't they, that, oh, it's really messy when we're doing our degree, but then when we go into industry, it's all set, there's a system, there's a process. And I think you're right, they don't realize that state of flux. And so this does really help to actually demystify some of those perceptions that people have, and really actually help them to realize, as you said, that even the people in industry are constantly trying to figure it out themselves. They don't get to a point where they go, right, I've got it now. And now this is the system we're going to follow for the next 5 years. They probably can't even follow that system for 3 months because of how fast paced our industry in particular is in media. And so, and I think also hearing those kind of war stories, or hearing a director of a large agency saying, you know, and then I messed it up, and I thought this was the way to do it, but that didn't work. I think that's really reassuring for the students, because it makes them realize that, you know, they have the permission to get it wrong. And, you know, if people that are that experienced can get it wrong and are still getting it wrong, and can hold their hands up and say, yeah, you know, I messed up, not once, not twice, but loads of times, I think it really helps students with their confidence. And I think hearing those war stories is really, really reassuring. Another thing that I always found is that when I worked in industry, I always used to feel like the hardest part of the job is never the job. It's always working with people and how you navigate that. And one of the things that you do on the MA is you really talk to students about communication and the way that they talk. And I know that you have people that come in and they do stuff on pitching and they do stuff on presenting, and they get to hear feedback in so many different voices, right, rather than just yours and mine. And then they can get used to how to respond to feedback from different people, right? They can't just sort of settle with, okay, this is the way that I have this conversation with Paul or with Seema. They've got to have that conversation with lots of different people from different backgrounds and that are at different levels in their career.
Yes.
And I think there's so many valuable things that they can learn in that whole process.
And I think that goes to that idea of confidence again. I don't want to keep harping on about the class thing, but I think it is important that a lot of the sort of even the people that we get on the course, quite a few of them haven't got that inbuilt confidence that comes from a particular class position. And I think by putting them into positions where they are pitching to very senior people in very big businesses and getting feedback from them, and what is really important, getting positive feedback from them, is a confidence builder. We do this project with Havas, which is one of the biggest media agencies and groups in the industry. And we do this project every year where we take the students along to the Havas offices at King's Cross, and they bring out, we work primarily with the global chief strategy officer. I mean, really high level people. And she brings in, director level people to brief the students and to give them an idea of what the Havas business is, what it's doing at the moment, how it's changing, etc. And then the students have to go away and come up with what we call a speculative fiction. We'll probably talk a bit more about this later, but the speculative fiction is like a Black Mirror episode, and they have to come up with a story about what Havas is going to be like in 2030. And then they go back with this story in a film format or a comic book format or what have you, and they pitch it back to these very, very senior people. And great, they get great feedback. Oh, this was really good, or what have you. But also they get to hear these people going, that's really interesting. You're saying things that we haven't thought before. This is really interesting. I'm going to take this and talk to my team about this. And they're realizing that they can make a contribution, that they're not going, Oliver Twist style to a business saying, please, sir, can I have some more, or can I have a starting point? They're realizing they've got value to add because not just because they're young and they're, for goodness sake, Gen Z, so therefore you need to employ some Gen Zs. No, they've got real value to add because they are thinking differently, and that's why a business needs me. And going back to your point, that's the sort of story they can start to tell about themselves as they develop the story they're going to tell when they leave, with their portfolio, with their project, with their CV, and the story they tell to any potential employer or recruiter. And it's coming with that confidence because they know that, yeah, I do have something to add to the industry here. I'm not just going to take a job. No, I'm going to start building a career because I've got something to offer here.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't value yourself, no one else is going to value you, right?
Yeah.
And this is such a big thing in our industry. If you can kind of go there and stand on your own 2 feet and show that you're okay to sort of, use your voice, it's respected, right? And you can get opportunities if my favorite phrase all the time that I use in life, at work, everywhere is, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I'm always saying to, my students, ask for it. If you don't ask, you don't know. What's the worst that can happen? They'll say no, right? But it does require a certain amount of confidence. And I think being able to have those conversations this early on, right, for the students is really valuable, right? Like, they're having these conversations, as you said, with directors of large agencies, and the first time they're doing that is not in a job, it's at university. And I mean, really, it should even be before that, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But they're doing it at uni, and that's great. And And then I think, as you said, when they hear that feedback, it can really flick a switch in their mind where they go, oh, okay, hang on. So I thought of that and they hadn't. And, you know, I have these ideas and they think, you know, they're going to take this back to the drawing board or they're going to use this somewhere. Like that's really, really critical for their confidence, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's
go on.
we're speaking from the basis of, you know, we're working with, you know, 20, 25, 30 MA students. So they're that bit older, they're that bit more mature, etc. You know, I remember when I taught on the BA degrees, I remember that when they come in as 18-year-olds, it takes, you know, the first part of their university degree to get them into the idea that this is not A levels. All right. They come in, you know, completely lacking in confidence, even if they've got good A-level results, because basically they've been trained in a particular sort of version of education. So when we were saying to them, no, you must think, you must make your own decision here, you must decide what direction you want to take this piece of work in, you must, etc., they would find that very difficult because the school system have been training them, not through no fault of teachers, through the fault of the curriculum and the way it's assessed and built, to a very instrumental view. And they come into universities, and you know, we have colleagues, you teach on the BA, I know, Seema, and you know, we have people who want to do this sort of different forms of education, but it's very difficult, at least for the first bit of the undergraduate degree, because you've got to get them into a completely different mindset to be able to deal with the sort of uncertainty and creative flexibility and thinking that is what we're talking about here. You know, I'm in a very privileged position because, you know, I'm dealing with MA students who are have had that bit longer to be developing that story and developing a different way of thinking about what education can do for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see that difference between first years and third years, and then you see it between third years and MAs. It's a massive, massive difference. And yeah, it just it creates a very different kind of conversation. But I completely agree with you about the mindset. And you know, this is a whole other debate, isn't it, about where that should start and how it should be and all of that. But I think as long as it's happening somewhere along the line in the system, that's positive. And then, you know,
But part of the problem, you know, we don't perhaps want to, you don't want me talking about schools, you want school teachers talking about schools, but you know, when arts funding and music funding and all those things that are to do with creativity, not just creativity in terms of making beautiful things, pictures or music or whatever, but creativity in terms of that side of the brain that's thinking differently, that's what industry needs. It needs that creative thinking. And when those subjects that are fostering that creative ability and that seeing the world differently ability are being cut in order to concentrate on other sorts of subject that aren't even being taught particularly creatively. All right, science and what have you can be incredibly creative and imaginative or what have you, but the way it's being forced into particular formats means that those creative skills are not being developed within schools. And then, you know, moving on. And again, that's doing a disservice to an industry and a society that needs those skills in children, young people, and then in adults.
Yeah, I think it's partly the subjects and the way that they're, the format of them and etc. But then it's also partly, you know, the style of the teacher, and that's a whole other debate as well, isn't it? You know, we certainly also have teachers that we've observed in higher education who submit to the old style, right? And we have our opinions on that, and they probably have their opinions on the way that we teach, you know. But I think it's just it's a tension that's existed for a long time, and it's probably going to carry on, right? Because everyone has a different idea of what the right way is.
But I think it's the way in which structure that teaching. So I remember when my own kids were at school, they had some absolutely brilliant teachers who bent the national curriculum until it had almost become pretzel shaped in order to be able to do the sort of teaching that they enabled them to do. You know, in universities, we are structured in particular ways to deliver things. Things have to be in units. They have to have assessments, formative and summative assessments with marks. We talked all about these sorts of things. All of those structure a teacher and encourage or mold a teacher into delivering content in particular forms. And there are exceptional teachers across all levels of education who find ways to do good teaching despite the structures in which they're placed.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. So Paul, I do ask all of my guests to do like a mini masterclass at the end of the show, just to sort of pass on a bit of their wisdom and a skill that they have that could be useful for the listeners of our show. So as you prepare yours, just a quick reminder to everyone out there that AQA, no teachers are the real experts in the classroom. And that's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training, and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you already know their work. And as we head into a new school year, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. So if you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, just head to their website or search AQA, We Work with Experts. So Paul, what do you have for us in terms of a mini masterclass?
All right. It's something that I use with my students. I mentioned it in terms of the project that the students do with Havas, but it's a thing I do myself every morning. I consider it to be my sort of mental calisthenics every morning. So I have my coffee and I sit there with my phone and I scroll through, the news of the day, and I pick one of those news stories and I create what is called a speculative fiction. And a speculative fiction is, as I mentioned before, think of it like a Black Mirror episode. The great thing about Black Mirror, when it works really well, is they're not just dystopian, they're not just utopian, they're somewhere in the middle. And the great thing about a Black Mirror episode or a speculative fiction is it gets you to think and think differently about things. That's why I call it the mental calisthenics. So what I do, and you can see more of these things on my website, speculation.studio, is I take a news story, and I was just, while Seema was introducing it just then, I had a quick look through my news feed at the moment, and there's a story that's just come out about how Spotify is linking to ChatGPT. It's a story on Gizmodo website. So what I do with a story like that is I pick different objects within that story, and they can be human objects or non-human objects. So you might, for instance, pick a Spotify user, a young guy who listens to Spotify. You might pick another object like the Chat GPT. You might pick another object like the culture that he's living in. And what you do is you make up a story and you see where that story takes you. So you might sort of think, okay, well, maybe this guy is trying to impress a girl, or a guy for that matter, and decides to create a mixtape on, or a playlist on Spotify, and puts a Spotify playlist together, but then ChatGPT gets involved and starts to change the playlist so it more carefully reflects what he's been searching or what he's been talking to ChatGPT about, or maybe it starts to target some data that they have on the girl he's trying to impress, or what have you. And you just sort of play with that story. And what I do is I just write a 100-word story. I sometimes get the students doing it as a comic book or making a film or what have you. But the whole point of just thinking about that story about Spotify and ChatGPT through human lens, through a different cultural lens, through the cultural practice of a mixtape or what have you, is you start to think about AI differently. You start to think about culture differently. You start to think about media differently. So daily speculation, it's your mental calisthenics. Let your brain play with stories, play with objects, and see where they take you. It's great fun.
Thanks, Paul. And I would definitely encourage all of our listeners to connect with Paul on LinkedIn, because he posts a daily, 100-word story every morning on LinkedIn, which I read as part of my morning routine. And they're brilliant. They're so...
You shouldn't be reading them, Seema. You should be writing them.
I should be writing them, but I'm more of a reader than a writer. So, but yeah, it's actually harder than you think as well. Well, not than you think, but than the listeners think. I think I would spend the majority of my time trying to trim it into 100 words rather than in the creativity of the writing. But yeah, that's
Write them any size. Just draw them. Just speculate. Speculation's good for you.
I can't draw. You should know that by now. But no, look, Paul, this was a great conversation. You made so many fantastic points, and thank you so much for coming onto the show. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
I did. Thank you for having me.
No, thanks so much. And yeah, good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.